few things on the agenda tonight. And so far I'm still feeling okay after second vaccine. I don't know when it hits you, but still feeling okay. So I'm here and ready to go. And recording just started. So I will call the meeting to order one more time. We're officially recording, everyone. The meeting
it was already recording, but it didn't pop up.
Show it. Okay. So I called it to order twice. Hopefully that's not the double negative and then we're off, but no, we're still in session. And the first order of business is for the approval of the April minutes. So has everyone had a chance to read our April minutes? Does anyone have any comments about our April minutes that Chuck so ably took for us? Thank you, Chuck. No comments. If I have no comments, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
May I have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All in favor? Actually, why don't we go ahead and hands up in the chat, and then we really know. Excellent. Except Chuck's not. Chuck, you're not approving your own minutes? There we go. Chuck approved his own minutes. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now we'll take them down. Let's see, almost down. A couple more are still up. One more down. Sal, I think that's you still up. Okay, there you go. Oh, actually, Valerie, I think you're still up too. Maybe I can help you to get it down. No. Okay, I got it down. Okay, any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you all very much. Excellent. Okay. And actually, before we go to public comment, so Josh is next. I'm sure he has some things to share with us. I will just say one more time that we are still looking for a vice chair for next year. So would love for those of you staying on the committee, and I know Chuck has reached out to find out what everyone's status is who needs to be reapproved or reappointed. And we did get a little bit more information. So some of you who didn't know that you needed to be reappointed may need to be reappointed. So Chuck, did you reach out to everyone, even the folks who may not have known? You did? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you have everyone's
information. There was a couple I had to police up today to get the invitation to. So, we can discuss afterwards and get the list up to the school so we can get it on the board agenda for next month.
Okay, excellent. And I know we have some candidates, and you and I can talk about that. Maybe if you have a little bit of time this weekend, you and I can talk about that, get ourselves in order. And but we are still looking for a vice chair for someone to step up for next year. So please, everybody, think about who has interest and would like to do so. And please reach out to myself or Chuck or both. And we'd love to talk to you about what it entails, because we will be looking for a vice chair for the committee going forward, and really encourage everyone to think about it, because it definitely is a worthwhile and interesting position to take on. Okay, with that, Chuck, do you want to add anything to that?
I think the only thing I would add on, sitting in the vice chair position, just even if you don't think you're ready, because it is a little bit bigger responsibility, but I think it just helps widen your aperture about your understanding of our school system, the different parts of the budget that you may not be familiar with. It kind of forces you to, dive into other areas that you may not be as comfortable looking into. And, I think just attending the planning sessions that we have with Leslie on a monthly basis just gives you a lot more perspective about what's going on. That is useful and helpful, even if not from a leadership role, but as a member of the community, and in our conversations that we all have with fellow parents about what is going on. So definitely worthwhile to take part in that.
Yep, and our newer members shouldn't be shy. So even if you're newer on the committee and you have interest, it is something that you can certainly do, even if you're newer on the committee, if you have interest in it. So I encourage everybody to think about it and let us know if you're interested. Okay. From there, we'll go to public comment. Josh, are you interested in saying something tonight?
Oh, I'm sure I could find a couple things to say. So first of all, I want to thank you all for the great work. If you guys don't think that the recommendations you put to the school board mattered, there was a survey that that they did actually conduct on parents for kids who withdrew from APS, and that made a difference by 500 kids, and $3.8 million, I think, was adjusted from the budget based directly on the survey that this group recommended, along with a few other groups. So it was wonderful to see that happen. Very pleased. Not everything I wanted. I won't say it was everything, but very pleased where compensation did land. We started with a compensation package of an additional $9 million that wound up being an additional $14 million. Which that was wonderful. And you guys also, I give some credit to this because that was in your recommendations to say, as we look at, if we're going to prioritize something, it's prioritizing the people who are here. And that certainly occurred in the compensation package from where it started. So was quite happy to see that. One thing, if I don't address it, that, it's sort of was implied as a budgetary issue, and I just want to assure people it not necessarily was. There was a statement that went out about summer school and how even with offering financial incentive, it didn't lure enough teachers. And I can assure you that it probably wasn't money that related to not getting enough summer school teachers. I think it was the exhaustion of the number of pivots that occurred in the past year and that everybody was simply done. So, anyhow, that is what I had to say on this year. Look forward to working with everyone on budget stuff. Next year, there is a compensation work session on the 19th. I very much hope that I am, or somebody from the AEA is deeply involved in all compensation discussions. So, Melanie, that is my wrap up. I thank you guys. I would also say I really do hope that these meetings, or at least a fair percentage of them, stay virtual as long as you guys can. I think it's gains participation from across the board that way.
Yeah, I think that last comment, and I don't know, I think that's definitely worth talking to Leslie about, and we can certainly do so. Chuck, let's note that for you and I to discuss afterwards. I do think we had wonderful participation this year in terms of our attendance. And so if this is something, I don't know if it's permitted for next year, but if it is something that we can continue into next year, I think it's definitely something we should poll the survey, the group about, and then consider continuing, because I have to note that in my several years on the committee, I definitely have seen our best attendance this year, despite the fact that people have felt tired and burned out and pulled in several directions, that the virtual format has definitely allowed people the flexibility to come despite other things going on, because they didn't have to get in their car and go to SciFac. So,
and Melanie, if I could put my ACTC hat on briefly, I polled our members and staff liaisons, and I said, email me your thoughts, one way or the other. And I received about 5 comments, all of them pleading with me to keep going in the virtual form.
Actually, that's a good idea. If everyone can, if everyone is here, can write to me if you have thoughts on format, that would be great. Just drop me and Chuck a note on your thoughts on format. If you have a strong feeling either way, that would be great. And then we know how the group feels. That would be great. Thank you. Thanks for suggesting that, Josh.
And I see one hand from Deidre. I don't know if that's for me or for you.
Yeah, I was just going to call on her as well. Deidre, did you want to say something too?
Yes. I just had a question of Josh, and maybe somebody else can expound on this later, but does anyone know when the survey was released and what the mechanics of the survey? Because I can tell you as a family, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I'll let Leslie answer it, but keep going, asking your question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we departed and I never received such a survey. I would have been happy to add to the 501 or whatever.
Leslie, do you want to answer this, because you might have all the specifics of how it was carried out?
The survey on the intent to return?
Yeah.
I have no information.
You don't know.
I'm sorry.
So I can give a little bit on that. And it was, from what I gathered, was the social workers of the various schools were charged with reaching out to the families.
Yeah,
it was not.
I also gleaned that, Josh. I just, I'm not trying to poke holes in anyone's like mechanics of a survey, but I was surprised when I listened to that portion of the school board meeting. I see Monique online, so maybe she can add to it.
And I will say, I can say one thing about it. I'm sorry, Monique, I should have let you speak. And that is, it wasn't really a survey. It was each school reached out specifically to people that had withdrawn from their schools. Now, they did not reach 100%. They never intended to reach 100% of the people who had withdrawn. They reached about 78% in the time frame that they had, and that's what the results were based on.
Interesting.
I was just going to add, if I could, yes, that's what happened. The schools were working on reaching out to everyone who had withdrawn, and they did not get 100% of responses, but they shared the responses that they received, and that's how they came up with that number.
Okay, I guess I would just add that I was never contacted. So again, I'm not trying to poke holes in anybody's methodology, but to the extent this continues to be a problem where we're trying to measure this data, I would just suggest a more robust process in the future.
Thanks, Deidre. Well, I can definitely share and take that back. We did note the percentage that we did not hear from, and we can talk about how we, as a school board, decided to kind of focus in on that 500 number later in our conversation, if you're interested in hearing that later.
That would actually be great. I get concerned about data, and I get concerned about data when it's not surveyed. Like, again, I'm not an economist, I'm not a surveyist, like I'm a lawyer, but as a lawyer, my antennae go up and I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So happy to hear more later. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you, Deidre, for adding that in. And in fact, Monique, I have you next on the agenda to give us some overall comments on the school board's adopted budget from your perspective before Leslie gives us a quick overview of that final budget. But we wanted to hear your perspective first, since I know this was a pretty big task this year, and you all got through it successfully, and hopefully everyone had a chance to view at least that portion of the meeting from last Thursday. But I know I wanted to give you a chance, since we worked together through the year, to comment for this community and this committee.
Absolutely. So Melanie, I just wanted to share, I think the two biggest things that I just need to focus on are big lever pushers. And I think that they've already been concentrated on, which include that the school board asked the superintendent to go back and scrub the numbers. Once we had information that of the 78 or so, 73, 78% of people who responded, it looked as though we weren't going to have 2,000 kids coming back. That made us try to figure out, well, what are the real numbers? And so we asked the superintendent to go back to our consultant, Dr. Grip, to give us better information about how we could hone in better on the numbers that we may not see in the fall, and how that relates to the number we were using to plan for our budget. And when Dr. Grip came back to us, he was hesitant actually to change the numbers really, because across the country, he's seeing this shift and this uncertainty of really where we are. And so Dr. Grip was able to say, listen, if you as a school board need to make a change, then he wanted to average out some previous years and then use a certain calculation to be able to really, I think, make sure that whatever number the school board wanted to consider would not put us in a bind of us not having enough teachers to start in the fall. And so while it was not his first recommendation to change the projection, and Dr. Duran did not want to change the projection, we did go with Dr. Grip's recalculation of eliminating about 535 or so students. The projection was that we would have potentially, I think, around 511 or so more students, and that's what we were planning for. that created a situation of a savings of, I think, just over $3 million. And then we put $500,000 into contingency in case we do have additional needs beyond the contingency money that we have set aside for the upcoming year. So what that really looks like is that, you know, and this is just rough, that we will probably, we're planning for the same amount of staff that we have currently. And if there are any concerns or any other contingencies that have to happen, we have an extra $500,000 in the contingency bucket to be able to address that. So at this point, the superintendent is working with staff at each of the schools and the principals to determine how this is going to impact planning for next year, because planning had been calculated preliminarily based on the larger number. So that's what's happening now. And the savings of the $3 million, we were able to, you know, have that savings. And then we looked at compensation, and we determined that we would go with a different compensation number than the superintendent had suggested. The superintendent had suggested a 2% increase, and then COLA only. And then he came back and said, well, we can maybe do, I think, a 2.175, I think it was, compensation increase in terms of a COLA, but no step. And the school board collectively decided to go with the different package, which included a step that started in the middle of the year. We had heard that not getting steps at 2 years in a row was very disconcerting for our staff. And by taking the 2% COLA increase, we were able to grab, I think, about close to $700,000 from the state, that the state was offering as an incentive to districts who showed at the first day of the new fiscal year an increase of at least 2%. So we determined that we would do that. It was fully, that was accepted by the school board, and that's how we're moving forward. And I think one of the things that we heard from my colleagues when we did pass that portion of the budget in the as an amendment is that we need to basically, through the beginning of this compensation study, we're going to have them coming up pretty soon. We're going to have to look at ways that we can better afford compensation. And I think that as school board members, we'll be looking at that and trying to figure out how the system that we have currently is really making it hard for us to offer a COLA and a step. And we may need to be looking at how we can address that issue in the future so that we can continue to ensure that whether you're on a step or not, compensation, you're rewarded for your hard work year after year. So those are the two main things I wanted to add. There were some other small things that we decided to do in terms of amendments. We decided to not take away a copier from each building. We decided to add a little bit of money for the art department to be able to ensure that our middle school students who take art classes have a kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Has the ability to be able to make sure that all of the items that they need for their classes is equitable from school to school to school. It's for supplies. Those are two of the other things that we amended in the budget. So that's what I have to share with you. And I don't know, Melanie, if there's questions, but that's where we are.
Great, thank you. And I know Leslie will give us a little bit more on the detail, but thank you. I think that was great, and thank you for giving us the two big things that I know you all addressed on Thursday night. Does anyone have questions for Monique before we dig into a little bit more detail with Leslie? And she'll probably put up some of the slides she shared on Thursday night, which show a few of the line items. But questions for Monique, or comments or thoughts from Monique after this long process and our final conclusion? No? Okay.
Okay, then I'll stand by. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Leslie, would you like to bring up some of the the detail for us, so we just have a little bit more. And again, hopefully most people were able to see it, but maybe they can see it up a little bit more, little closer detail, and ask a couple of questions if people had any last clarifying questions on the end of this process that we spent so much time focusing on.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Sorry, so the board adopted its budget on Thursday, and we started off with a discussion of the enrollment projections. I don't know, I mean, I don't want to have to present this all over again, but we talked about their enrollment projections and what Dr. Grip recommended and how that affected enrollment. And then this meant that obviously we would reduce an additional 36.9 positions and almost 3.5 million. And then there were some updates to the budget. We started off with what was in the school board's proposed budget, what they actually adopted on April 8th. And then there were updates from that time, including the additional one-time funding from the county, and then some new items that we needed to put into the budget for next year, as well as some items that were on the school board's reduction list in their proposed budget and that were included in their proposed budget that we wanted to have the school board reconsider. And then also in compensation option 1, the 3% COLA was calculated as a full year instead of midway through the year. So the net of all of those expenditure changes was just over $180,000. And then we had some other reductions that the school board wanted to implement in addition to the ones that were implemented in the proposed budget. And those you see here, and that included musical instruments, copiers, some professional learning for national board certified teachers, some funding for aides hourly and transportation services in student services, and then a class size increase at grades 1 through 5. There was already a class size increase included at K in the school board's proposed budget. And there was one addition to the budget to add a 0.8 FTE for the Kenmore Exemplary project that had been reduced in the FY21 budget. So those total net reductions were 1.3 million. With the additional updates from both the superintendent and the school board, the budget ended up looking like this, with $11,033,000 needed from reserves. So that's where the amendment the adoption started with those parameters. Then there was an amendment to the main motion to reduce the enrollment by the 525 students, providing the savings we showed before, and then moving 500 of the savings into the staffing contingency and putting 2.9 million back into reserves. The next amendment changed the compensation option from 1 to 4 and needed an additional almost $5 million, and that was taken from reserves. And this is compensation option 4 here, with 2% COLA at the start of the year, plus a step increase midway through the year, and an additional step at the top of the scale, also midway through the year for C, E, G, M, P, and T scales. There was another motion from Ms. O'Grady with the visual arts student planning factor. And then there was one more amendment that was not included in here that, let me go back up here, that put back this reduction, the remove 1 copier per building at $85,000. That was an amendment to put that back in rather than reduce it, and that passed as well. So, and that was funded from reserves as well. So this number is not quite right. It's $85,000 off, but the school board did adopt the correct amount. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the adoption of the school board budget.
And
Chuck.
see Chuck's hand. Oh, yep. Go ahead.
Leslie, quick question on summer school. Had at any point, because we've seen the email come out about, you know, what some of the constraints are going to be. Had it, at any point was contracting individuals to teach summer school considered, or would that have been feasible just based on rules, you know, union, that kind of stuff?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Chuck. What do you, when you say contracting people, what do you mean?
So given that APS teachers did not volunteer in enough numbers to have the summer school as originally envisioned, would it have been feasible to contract outside help, you know, non-APS employees, but, you know, seek them from the outside to fill that gap?
We always seek staff, teachers from other jurisdictions. It is not only open to APS employees. So we do put it out there for the world to see that we are asking for additional teachers for summer school and APS, and they can be Fairfax or Falls Church or any other kind of licensed teacher. So we don't only include APS teachers in that search. Is that what you're asking? Am I answering the right question?
Chuck, we are aware of that option.
No, I was asking if it had been considered, or if, yeah, there just wasn't, you know, any level of interest to have, you know, the staffing needed based on what we had originally thought the scale of summer school was going to be.
We are aware of that option, Chuck, and we'll see what happens, but we are aware of that option. And that option.
We're using that option, and we always use that option. I mean, we do give first dibs to APS employees when the positions come open, but it is not limited to APS teachers. We will take any teacher that wants to come work at APS for summer school. The reality is that we needed many more teachers than we normally need in a summer school year, and we have not been able to get those teachers.
Okay, thank you.
So far. I mean, maybe more will sign up, but at this point, we haven't been able to get enough. Anyone else? No other questions?
I was going to say, quiet group, no other questions? The end of a long budget season and no other questions?
Everybody's tired.
I was just thinking the same thing. We got to the end. This was a mammoth budget to review and approve. I think we are at the end. I think people are feeling like they were at the end. Well, if there's really no other questions, I'm just congratulations, Monique and Leslie, for getting through the season and for getting it all approved and getting us to the point where we have a budget for next year after such a tough year. So I hope everyone is feeling relieved and proud for getting through this tough season. So we want to thank you for doing all the hard work that you did to get there. So thank you. And I think we do have a quiet group because everyone's been following along and you know, we obviously dug in very deep, so nothing is really a surprise to us. We've been really following along with you, but thank you very much for all that you did. It was a tremendous year, and thank you for letting us follow along and participate with you, and for letting us provide input. And I hope some of it was helpful, or at least deeply considered as you decided and made your final choices. But thank you all for everything that you all did, and obviously your teams as well.
And if I can just say thank you on behalf of the school board for all of the work that you guys did on scrubbing the budget, giving us suggestions, thinking beyond this current year to how we can continue to look at strategically ensuring that we can afford what our students need, and that we're not caught flat-footed in the future. I was so impressed with the work that you guys did, and I was happy to watch as you guys deliberated back and forth on how you're going to share your suggestions with us in a way that adequately and appropriately captured the different sentiments of the group. And just want to thank you guys for all your hard work. I thought it was really masterful. And while we couldn't take every single suggestion, it was not that they were not considered thoughtfully as you put them forth. So really do appreciate all the hard work of the BAC, and I look forward to seeing what you guys offer next year, though I won't be in the seat to vote on it. I know that you will be offering some really thoughtful suggestions. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, well, that actually leads us to our last item, big item on the agenda, which is to discuss our final recommendations, which actually lead us into next year. So maybe if I can ask folks to turn their cameras back on, because we'll have another discussion. And it's so much nicer to have a discussion face to face rather than face to bubbles. And so I really love looking at the group. And so I appreciate, thank you for all popping back on so I know who I'm talking to, especially because you're all going to give me a whole bunch of feedback now. Oh, Leslie's raising her hand.
Are we
Leslie.
CIP?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you wanted to do the CIP.
Oh, do the CIP. No, of course we have to do the CIP. Here I am all excited, but I got to run back on camera for you for the CIP, Leslie. Yes, please go ahead and do the CIP first. No, go back and do the CIP. We definitely want to do the CIP. So can you run us through the CIP, because that's definitely one of the things. But now we're going to chase everyone off camera again. But don't go too far away, guys, because I'm going to chase you back on camera again. So that was also lovely. Everyone popped back on so quickly. Yes, Leslie, thank you. We do want you to do the CIP. I would be kicking myself afterwards. I just got too excited about the discussion part. Please do the CIP.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm actually going to take you to the presentation that was used at the first work session, mainly because the chart in this one is updated from the school board's adopted. So here's where we started. We went over the CIP question process, the fact that you can find anything out about the CIP on the Engage page. Talked about the overview of the process. That's really for the school board. And then we talked about the capital projects that are in the superintendent's CIP, and how they matched up with the school board's direction on the CIP. So there was direction from the school board for additional secondary seats, and there is a new plan for the Career Center, and then which would include a relocation of Arlington Community High School. There was a direction for facility improvements at the Career Center for the current enrollment, the current students in that building. There was an expansion into the library that was completed and some other small renovations to the building. But at this point, with the desire of the school board to have a new career center sooner rather than later, it says opening in 2026 here. There was discussion at the meeting on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? Yesterday? Yes, sorry. Oh, it's already been a long.
It was yesterday.
Yes, yesterday. Wow. It seems like it was so long ago, Monique. Anyway, that with the desire to have the Career Center project done as quickly as possible, including even possibly by fall of 2026, fall of 2025, that no additional improvements would be made to the Career Center project. They would require a lot of funding that would then be not needed when we go back in to repurpose the building and renovate it for elementary needs as part of that overall Career Center project. We have upgrades to kitchens, and the kitchens are listed there. We have a lot of kitchens that have been serving kitchens from when we had a central kitchen, and the central kitchen made the food and sent it out to the schools, and the schools were really serving kitchens. And these kitchens right now don't have a lot of storage, which we need, especially with the increased populations at all the schools that have come about over the last 10 years. And we are trying to serve more fresh fruits and vegetables as part of, the Healthy Children's Nutrition Act. Can't remember what it's called. But these are kitchens that are overdue for some upgrades, especially to meet health department code. Security vestibules, this is reconfiguring the main entrances of these schools to provide the kind of security that we want to have at our schools. Air quality and HVAC, which are some near-term HVAC enhancements. The Heights building, this is the last phase of the Heights building. There's a separate phase from the overall construction project to create an underground parking garage and an artificial turf field above it. And then we are sharing costs with the county to replace some turf fields at Wakefield High School, W&L High School, Williamsburg Middle School, and the Greenbrier Stadium, which is basically the Yorktown High School. Plus, there's funding for other major infrastructure projects in the superintendent's proposed. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, Melanie, because this is, as you can see, quite a long presentation.
It is a long presentation. Just the highlights, not that much detail. There's one hand up from Bob. Bob, did you want to pop in and ask something now about what Leslie was just talking about?
She might be just ready to address it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll wait till after she talks about the Career Center, because that's where my question is.
Okay. Now remember, I'm the budget woman. I deal with numbers, not construction.
Yep.
So I'm going to run through these very, very quickly and hit the highlights as I am aware of them. So this is the proposal to build a new Career Center facility. It is to build this new Career Center that's at number 3 in the middle of the diagram, and then and that would require demolishing the Fenwick building, which houses the Arlington Community High School. So that would have to be the first part of that. Then they would move the students from the Montessori Public School of Arlington, which is in the upper right-hand corner of the diagram. No, that is not correct. I'm misoriented. I'm sorry. So the Fenwick building is at number 1, that gray shadow. MPSA is down at the bottom left, that gray shadowy building looking thing there. That would be, the students would be moved from there over to the existing Career Center, and the Career Center would be repurposed for MPSA, possibly with a larger population. And then the Montessori Public School of Arlington would be demolished and a new field would be built there. And then possibly a parking structure after.
On 9th Street.
Yeah, up number 6, is that, no, that's not it, okay.
It's not really shown here, but
No.
if you go to the next slide, Leslie, it would be easier.
Ah, there we go.
There
Look
we
at
have
that.
it. See, how about that?
You know this better than I do.
So, I mean, I'll just add in that play space in the bottom, which is along Highland Street, would be the new play space for the Montessori school, and part of the Career Center would be demolished to make space for that. The parking would happen along 9th Street, and the new Career Center building would be in the middle. The schematic that was shown in the last slide is actually it's actually the footprint for the new high school in Falls Church, I believe. And that's not to show you that that's what we're building. That's just to show you the massing can be done in a way that can fit on what is currently the parking area. And then if you go, and then if you see at the top corner where it says large field and green space, that corner of Walter Reed at the top that goes horizontally, and then it's bordered by 7th Street there. There's going to be a temporary parking space there so that when there is building in the center part of that space, which is basically building on the current parking lot, there will be some temporary flat space for parking. I just happen to know this a little better because this is my neighborhood.
Thank you, and I'm so grateful that you did. No, you do know that stuff better than I do.
I know the streets a little better, so there we go.
All right. This goes over the phasing, what would happen when. So there's, certain things that have to be accomplished before the next phase can happen. And that's basically the Career Center. So if there's a question about the Career Center, let's talk about Career Center now and answer those questions.
Bob, I think you have your hand up again.
Yes, if I understand it, the previous issue about whether they were going to need to build a submerged parking garage so that they'd have field space above it is now gone because they're totally reworking and tearing down buildings and rewickering the entirety. So the underground parking is no longer necessary. Am I understanding that?
That is correct, but there will need to be some form of parking structure on the site in order to accommodate parking for 2 schools.
Okay, parking. Yeah, we got to do things vertical. That's true. And I just didn't know if it was going to be underground parking with the field on top or, okay, a parking garage. That's fine too. Good. Thank you very much.
No, not with doesn't mean that we might not go into the ground over on the right with the parking. I have no idea what that might entail, but there won't be fully underground parking with a field on top.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on. Okay, the phasing, the heights. So the heights is building an underground parking garage with.
I'm sorry, Leslie. May I interrupt you? It did say a large field. So is the large field an equivalent to one of the regular high school fields, or is the large field something less than that? In other words,
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
Okay, all right, that comes to mind anyway. Because I know one of the issues is whether it was going to be a comprehensive high school, the equivalent of a comprehensive high school or not.
So I can jump in there if I might, Leslie.
Absolutely, anytime, Monique.
Oh, thank you. This proposal starts with the understanding that this will be an option site only. However, I believe that this gives us the same space as was originally planned for the field, which was to be a regulation size field. I think that is possibly what is planned here, because I think they were just trying to figure out how to fit everything in a way that would be affordable. And so by building this new ACC building from scratch, it makes it less of a Jenga puzzle so that we're not trying to tie in new things and old things, and it makes it, I believe, more affordable. And one of the other benefits of this is you're not trying to build around a place where students are inhabiting. And we've seen that before when we built the new W&L building and the new Wakefield building. We built in new space and then tore down old buildings. So this takes advantage of that opportunity. And I believe that it says large field, but I believe it would be the same size field as what was planned before. I'll try to get some more clarity to see if it's regulation.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I will as
See, I'm
well.
not on mute again. Yeah, thank you.
All right, moving on to the heights. Again, parking garage with a turf field above. There were several options that were considered by staff that were brought to, and the three are shown. There are four of them: A, C, D1, and D2. They differ somewhat in exactly what they provide. Staff is recommending option A. Lots of rationale behind that. I'm not going to go into that. Here's option A. There's option C. Option D1. And option D2. And then the various cost options for those, the various costs for each of the options shown here. So some of the rationale is that a below grade facility provides a covered accessible entrance, that short and long-term handicap parking is right there next to the building, and there would be off-street drop-off, pick up and drop off. There would be bike storage, equipment storage, student bicycle racks, and it allows the largest possible field at that site. And then the reasons for option A has it's comprehensive in addressing a number of issues that were just talked about prior on the prior slide. Lower estimated total project cost. Even though option C is a lower price tag per se, it has significantly fewer features than the option A. And then D1 and D2 would require a lot of investment because of underground stormwater facilities. Kitchen renovations, talked about that a little bit. This is when they would be accomplished, and they are in priority order from our food and nutrition services staff in their evaluations of the various kitchens and which ones need to be done sooner rather than later. Campbell, Swanson, and Arlington Science Focus would also have the entrance renovations done at the same time, and the cost for the entrance renovation is included in the renovation cost shown here. Many reasons for the kitchen renovations. I think I alluded to some of them. Certainly the serving areas, the storage and prep areas, cooking. We need more cooking area because none of our kitchens were, I wouldn't say none, but most of our kitchens were not designed or when they were done to do cooking. They were there to more just heat things up. We used to have a warehouse, for those of you who did not know that. It was closed before I got to APS, but food used to be delivered to the warehouse in bulk, and it was stored there. And so there was a lot of space to be able to store a lot of food. Now it goes directly to the schools, and the schools just don't have the space to store that amount of food. I mean, we have to get deliveries several times a week instead of maybe just once a week. Plus, even with several days a week, sometimes we don't have enough refrigeration space for some of the schools that have larger populations that eat food services meals. And then bringing things up to current code and Department of Health requirements. We do have some kitchens that have had some health department issues and need to be fixed. All right. And then this just shows, the number of slides here show exactly what would be done to each school in order to accommodate the larger kitchen, storage, prep areas, plus possibly additional serving lines. We want to have 2 lines at each school. We don't have that right now. And that would help with some of the lunch, the longer lunch times that we need to have now because we only have 1 serving line. Swanson Middle School, Drew Elementary School, Randolph Elementary School, et cetera, et cetera. The main entry vestibules, the security entrances, they are at the schools shown here. Also, again, to provide that the main entrance, typically it's through the main office, so that there is an ability to, what's the word I want? Wow, I'm sorry.
About
tonight.
intercept and process.
Yes, thank you.
Visitors,
So
yeah.
to make sure that anybody has to come through, be signed in. For our visitor management system. Sorry. No, what's wrong with me tonight?
Say, Leslie, I don't know if other people are experiencing this problem, but I've lost your shared screen.
Does everybody else have that same problem?
I've still got it. I've still got it.
I don't know how it's gone from mine then. All right, thank you.
All right. Rationale for the entrances, I think we just want to meet current safety and security standards and do some of the things that I just talked about, which is ensuring that our visitors are funneled through the main office in order to undergo all the things they need to through the visitor management system. Air quality, some near-term HVAC enhancement projects in the CIP with some targeted interventions. And that's mainly to improve filtration. We also have some larger HVAC projects that are included under the major infrastructure for those schools that are nearing the end of the useful life of their HVAC and need to have their HVAC, the system, the whole system replaced. So we've done the studies of the HVAC systems. We know that we need to increase ventilation and we need to increase filtration. We looked at doing improvements at 19 different facilities, but they were very expensive. We're talking between $20 and $30 million per facility to do the large scale improvements that we're talking about. So we're going to do these near-term enhancements to improve filtration and then do the HVAC replacements and upgrades as we need to replace the HVAC. All right, moving on to.
Before you move on, Valerie has a question.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Yes, in terms of the filtration, I think I went to a meeting, one of the CIP meetings, and I believe I don't know if he was facilities management or the managers, they discussed that they were going to be starting this, I believe, in the upcoming school year. Because of the coronavirus, we had sort of discussed that that's going to be like a priority, because if you're going to have children back on site, that they need to have the, I guess, the filtration. You need to have an upgrade to that system. So could you speak a little bit more about that?
I can speak a tiny bit more about that.
Okay.
Because I'm not the air quality person.
Okay.
And the person who is not here tonight. So we did put individual standalone room filtration systems into each of the classrooms that are currently being occupied. And there will be those same systems in all of the classrooms in the fall. They are little standalone air filters, air filtration systems that are being used in the classrooms. The projects that are going to be done, the larger projects are going to replace and renovate the entire systems in the schools, the HVAC system in the schools, to achieve that MERV 13 filtration rating that is needed at those schools. But that's a big thing. So I think what they're trying to do are these near-term HVAC enhancements. Again, the certified air cleaning devices, which we're already using.
Okay.
They address immediate ventilation and filtration needs, and we're going to continue to use those. And then, and I don't know exactly what the targeted interventions are at the schools other than the CACDs, but apparently there are some that they can perform within the next 3 years, rather than waiting for a comprehensive HVAC system replacement. And that would be more cost effective than just going in and replacing an HVAC system right now, rather than waiting until it's time to replace that system and then making those comprehensive upgrades for ventilation and filtration at that time.
Okay, and as long as they feel that that will be safe for both the teachers and for the staff and the children.
Yes, I mean, that's what's happening in the schools right now with the teachers and the students who are in schools right now. We have those certified air cleaning devices in use in the classrooms for teachers and students right now.
Okay.
With all the students in hybrid, and they will continue to be used into the fall and beyond to help us meet those needs.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to fields. We talked about this replacement of 3 turf fields at Wakefield, Washington Liberty, and Williamsburg middle schools, and then Yorktown High School. And those are shared costs with the county, and this is our portion of those costs. And Sal put a question in the chat. Oh, someone else put a question in the chat. Do you know if replacing the turf fields means putting in new turf or replacing with grass? No, it means putting in new synthetic turf. There's currently synthetic turf fields, and they are going to be replaced as synthetic turf fields. Newbie question, the CIP, is there a rule of thumb how I should be thinking of the percent that is funded by incremental bonds debts and or funded through the general fund budget? Maybe use the 21-22 budget we just did as an example. The CIP is really the major capital program. So that really lends itself to new buildings, additions to buildings, complete renovations of buildings when you take something down to the studs and kind of reconfigure it a little bit and then put it back together. And then some of the major infrastructure things that we're talking about in this budget cycle, the CIP cycle, like replacing kitchens, because not replacing kitchens, expanding the kitchens, because it's taking in all but one scenario, we need to actually put an addition on the building in order to accommodate the larger kitchen. And then larger infrastructure projects like a complete HVAC system, which costs millions of dollars. It could cost 10, 15, $20 million, depending on how much of the system you need to replace. That's not something that we can handle through the annual budget. That lends itself entirely to trying to do that with bond funding. The money that we have in the annual budget, which is what we call MCMM, or minor construction major maintenance, is some of the smaller things that don't meet the criteria for a capital project and to be bond funded. And really that means that it has to have a useful life of at least as long as the maturity of the bonds, or 20 years. So for Arlington has a history of taking out 20-year bonds and then paying them off after 11 or 12 years. So whatever we do to the building has to last at least that long, preferably 20 or more years, in order to be bond funded. So some of the smaller things like replacing a playground, or that's $20,000 or $30,000, or doing a new paint job in a building, or replacing some of the flooring, or doing a new gym floor, or doing ADA upgrades. Those kinds of things don't lend themselves to a large capital project that costs, at least $500,000. That's why we have the difference between MCMM in the annual budget and these big projects in the capital improvement plan.
Thanks. I think I got you. This is
okay.
So the CIP is essentially 100% debt funded. Anything it's not is in the other category.
Right. Essentially, it is. We do use money from the capital reserve, but a large percentage of the funding in the capital reserve is either from bond premium, which then must be used for capital projects, or savings from prior capital projects. There has been some funding that was put into the capital reserve from close out at the end of each fiscal year, but that's a smaller percentage of that total capital reserve than the bond funding.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Let's see. Okay, here we are, major infrastructure. So this includes, but isn't limited to, because there might be some other things that we need to do that aren't listed here, but HVAC, and that means, really replacing a system or upgrading a system. Electrical, if we have to do replace the electrical in a building. A roof is $5, $6, $8 million, or replacing all the windows in a school, depending on what the useful life, where they are on the useful life of that. So we have these funds in here to tackle those projects as needed over the course of each year. All right, so on to the actual budget piece of this. Now, typically, for those of you who are new, we do a capital improvement plan every 2 years in the even year. Last year, 2020, we should have done a 10-year CIP, but with the pandemic, a 1-year CIP was adopted by the school board, the county and the school board both, decided to do a one-year CIP. This year is an off year for the CIP, but we're going to do a CIP that fills in the gap until next spring, when we hope and intend to return to the 10-year capital planning process. So this year is a 3-year time frame. With a look at some of the out years, just because the Career Center planning process is going to take more than just the next 3 years, and we want to be able to see how that plays out in the out years. The county provides us estimates of future years' revenue, and when we first started this process, they were only providing 3 years of estimates. They have provided an additional 3 years, but they are very conservative estimates, and really just to help us with our planning, not to hang our hats on. And then the county is also doing a 3-year CIP that they will propose in early June. And here is the chart that shows the funding of each of the projects. I can go over how to read this chart if you want. I gave a quick lesson to the school board on Thursday night. But across the top here, where there's light blue, there's the projects in the first column on the left. Then we begin by showing what the other funding sources are, because we can have funding sources other than the bond funding that we will see in this CIP, which is in the 6 columns to the right there. There could be a piece in the operating budget, there could be MCMM, there could be funds from capital reserve, or there could be previous bond funding that was approved in a prior CIP that is available for the project. The projects are listed here on the left. If the project is in italics, it means it was in the FY21 CIP. If it's not in italics, then it means it's a new project for this CIP. If a project, for example, the Drew and Randolph kitchens. So we have funding in FY22 and FY23. We expect the completion to be by the fall of 2023. So this cell right here, the white cell to the right of the colored cells, is the completion date. So the seats, if it was a capacity generating project, the seats would be available in the fall of 23. The idea is that this project would be finished and available to the schools in the fall of 23. So that's how you read that portion of the chart. The color coding pertains to down here, where we show what the bond referenda are going to be in each of the next several years. There is going to be a bond referendum this year in the fall, which is a very unusual thing. Usually those only happen in the years that we do a CIP, so every other year. But this is a little bit different because of the pandemic. So there will be a bond referendum in the fall. So anything that's in blue, coded up here, that's blue, will be in the 21 referendum. Anything that's green up in this area would be in the 22 referendum, and so forth. Anything that's in italics, again, was in a previous CIP. We're just showing it as funds that will be available for that project once they are sold. In the case of Campbell and Swanson here and the Heights building, we are using a little bit of money from the capital reserve, mainly to get a jump start on both of those projects. Otherwise, we would have to wait until after the bond referendum in the fall to begin them. But if we can begin them now, we can get them done sooner. Let's see here. So at the bottom of the chart, there's a total projects line, and all of the things that are up here in the chart total 156.71 million. The next line down shows how much we could sell and maximize our 9.8% target debt ratio. Our maximum debt ratio is 10%. We have used 9.8% over the last several CIPs as the target because there are so many assumptions that are built into the calculations that it would be, I don't want to say dangerous, it wouldn't be prudent, quoting a famous person that we all know, to take it up to the 10%, because as we saw with the pandemic, if something happens to the economy and all of a sudden you don't have the revenue that you thought you were going to have, then you could be exceeding the 10% debt ratio with the projects that you already have on board and in process. So you want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case something untoward happens in the economy, and you want to be able to stay under your 10%. Now, the 10% is an Arlington County imposed limit. Arlington County and the schools each have a 10% debt limit. There have been times in prior years when the school board requested additional debt capacity from the county because even though we have our own 10%, the bond rating agencies look at the county as a whole. So even if the schools were above 10%, as long as the overall total was less than 10%, it's all good. So this is how much we can actually sell with the 9.8% target debt ratio. So the next line tells us how much over or under what we already want to sell for the projects we have available to us. So we are already spending, or we already have included $156.7 million in projects in this CIP. We could sell up to another $147.9 million for projects in this CIP based on the numbers that we have. We want to keep in mind that, 9.8%, I would recommend 9.8% and not going to 10%. Also, when you sell bonds in 1 year, that affects the debt service that we have to pay in the annual budget the following year. So for example, if in FY22 we sell $85.87 million worth of bonds, then that would add about $8.6 million in debt service to FY23. Now, there are some bonds that are retiring, so we aren't going to increase by $8.6 million, but we would increase by something like $5.7, $5.8 million in debt service. So that's a very large increase to try to absorb in one budget cycle, especially in FY23, because that's the year after the one we just approved, or the school board just approved, and the FY22 budget has about $40 million in one-time funds funding the budget, and we don't know how we're going to replace those funds for FY23. So FY23 is starting off $40 million in the hole, plus then we would be adding another $5 or so million in debt service on top of that. So those are the kinds of things to keep in mind as we go through the CIP process, is balancing the need for projects and completion times with how it affects the debt ratio and how it affects the annual debt service that we're paying. And it's a very delicate balance. It's not easy at all. There were some questions on the capital reserve that came up between the introduction of the CIP last Thursday and then Tuesday evening. So we answered those questions here. There is a $32.2 million balance in the capital reserve currently after the school board adopted its budget, of which 24 million is bond funded and 8.1 million is non-bond funded. The county is estimating that for the spring, when we sell our bonds, we will receive a bond premium between $6 and $8 million. And typically that is added to the capital reserve to be used for capital projects because that is a requirement of those funds. And then the question was raised, do we have any projects that have been completed that have balances, surplus balances that could be transferred to the capital reserve? And these are the two projects that we have currently. Connect Arlington is completed. Randolph HVAC, I believe, is completed, but we haven't fully closed the books yet. So 75 is more of an estimate, but about $200,000 could be transferred to the capital reserve. Well, I've talked a lot. I'm sorry. Timeline, very quickly. There's a work session on the 25th. There's the school board's proposed budget is on proposed CIP is on June 3rd. There's a joint work session with the county board on June 9th, public hearing on June 10th, another work session on June 14th. And then June 24th is when the school board is scheduled to adopt its CIP with voting on the bond referendum in November. All right, I talked way too much. I'm very sorry.
I just wanted to add that while Leslie was giving us all that great information, I was able to confirm through two different sources that the field at the proposed career center kind of schematic is a full-size field.
Thanks, Monique.
Yep, thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Leslie. That was great, actually. That was a great overview, and thank you for answering everyone's questions and giving us a lot better detail into that. I know we would probably have more questions, but just because I do want to make sure that people are giving input on the year-end report, because this is our one time to talk about it as a group, I am going to transition us, and then I'm going to encourage everyone to come back, put their cameras back on, and come back into discussion mode, so we can talk about our year-end report, and I can get people's comments live, since that's always a nicer way to do it. And I will take notes here. And then obviously, just like every time, if people have additional comments, they can send them to me. And I will send a follow-up note after this to collect everyone's comments by Saturday at noon. But I will go ahead now and entertain comments. If anyone else who's down below can come back on, please do. So I know who is participating in the chat, this chat part. So if you're here and you're going to participate in chat, please go ahead and turn your camera on so I know who is here and available for chat and who has stepped away from their computer and may not be chatting with us. But thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, great. Hopefully you all had a chance to take a look at the report. And unfortunately, it looks like we may have lost a couple folks since we're getting to this a little bit later in the meeting, but I'll follow up with those folks who we may not have here tonight or we may have lost, but we'll definitely open up and we can do it section by section. As you see, I structured it just a little bit differently than I thought when I actually got the comments back and I started to put it into format. I actually structured into recommendations reinforced from 2021, so things we had put into other reports from this year, and we had written, as you saw from the activity report, we've actually written several things this year. Recommendations reinforced from past BAC reports, and that was I went back over the last couple of years of reports that we had available, and then we put input into the FY23 budget guidance, so we were at least ahead of the game in the thinking last year. It was really great that the board, Monique and Leslie, all made time for us in the calendar to give comments, but we were giving comments a little later in the cycle when really that guidance was written. And so one of the things that Bob and Chuck and I had talked about was it would be nice for us to get ahead of the thinking. We may have time again next fall to comment on it later in the process, which would also be super, but this way we'll have given some of our comments even before that budget guidance is written, so maybe have a chance to at least be in the thinking process or have our comments considered as folks are thinking in advance. So hopefully that structure made sense to folks. But as I was compiling comments and thinking, I know that was a little different than how I asked for you to give them to me, but I think I got most comments into the report. So, or at least tried to put the spirit of most things that were said to me. So why don't we start with the first one in terms of recommendations reinforced from 2021, and I'll open it up either to themes that you wish you saw that you didn't see, or to the themes that I did write down if people had any comments about the way I captured them. And again, to remind folks, it's about how we're recommending we shift to longer term planning, recommending more measured use of the reserves, urging the board and superintendent to address to continue to address, and I can write that, compensation for existing APS staff, since they took a good step this year, which is great. Urging the board to have more direct discussions with the county so we know where we stand. Recommending a longer term use of virtual schooling to get some of that discussion we had right at the end of last time. But those were the bigger themes that we pulled out. Obviously, there's some detail underneath them. So any commentary you had around the themes or the way they were captured is welcome. Jen.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Thanks for putting that together. On the transportation stuff, one of the items from a couple years ago that came up is a very strong recommendation that seems to have fallen off the table a bit is, in addition to the items you have listed, it's also revising the bell schedules at the school. That came up as a big opportunity to redo things in a way that would make the routes more efficient. So maybe we could add that in with your listed items.
I think it's a great idea. And I'm noting that down. I think there was some work done on that. So I would invite for a minute if Leslie or Monique or even Josh want to comment. I think there was some work done on that. And I don't know if we think there's still opportunity there. We captured that opportunity. But if anyone else on the call has any thoughts around that, I do know that there was a lot of discussion around that. I'm very happy to put it in. But if anyone wants to educate or inform us about whether or not we think that has all been captured or there's more to do, I welcome any additional input before we put it in the report.
So one thing I would say on just putting my ACTC hat on for just a minute, is there is certainly opportunity, and ACTC puts these comments repeatedly in their reports of wanting to have better use of bell times, because the goal is more trips per bus per day. The more trips you can get out of a bus, then the fewer buses you need. So, and there is definitely more work that needs to be done on this. People are very resistant for bell times to change at schools. They'll tell you things like, we're all parents, right? Things, if my child's school changes bell time by 30 minutes, well, I've made everything work already. And then you get a lot of uproar. I wish there was more adjustment that had been looked at, but we were all stretched thin during the pandemic.
Okay, so you think there is more opportunity here?
Oh, definitely, very much so.
Okay, great. So Jen, thank you very much. And I will make sure that this is good catch. And I do remember those conversations, and I will add that into the list here.
Yeah, this does need to come definitely out of the committees, because there is always a lot of pushback on that. Okay,
understandable, right? I mean, change is hard for anyone. So this is very, very understandable, especially if your kids suddenly have to go earlier, and earlier is hard for them, or if they have to go later and that is disruptive with your work schedule, or if suddenly you have to get to work because you're someone who has set hours and you don't have anyone to cover your kids or drive them to school or drop them at the bus. And we have a lot of parents in those positions too. So this is very understandable. So these are not easy decisions, and nothing we write down is easy, but that's why we're capturing them. And we were sending the points in for other people to discuss and debate and make decisions on, but our job is to give recommendations, and we can certainly include that. Jen, good point.
Melanie, I just add that as we have a new head of facilities in the district, it is potentially helpful to remind remind us of all the different things that we have at our disposal. I do believe that there was some language saying that this is something we may need to be looking at in the future. So I don't think there's any harm in offering that reminder that this is something we could potentially look at, though I do appreciate your verbal caveat that for some families who have to get to work at a particular time and understanding that we may not have extended day opportunities for lots and lots of people, this could be really a real problem that people have to wrestle with. But I don't think it harms us for you to remind us that this is a potential tool in our toolbox.
Okay, great. Other comments like that of things we have talked about, which I may have missed, even in terms of making any of the comments that I tried to capture here, Richard, I think that's a great example of that, Jen.
Was the transportation, just keep my transportation hat on for 1 minute, of more partnering with the school with the county to maximize using art buses for transit of kids? Was that in your report too?
It wasn't, and we should. You know, I think the reason I was a little bit more hesitant, and I shouldn't have been, is obviously that's a little harder to stomach during a pandemic. But if we have more students, especially if now all of our high school students can get vaccinated, then I think, and the pandemic starts to fade away, I think that's going to be a little easier for families to handle. And when I wrote this, we didn't have even one grade. We had one school level covered by vaccinations, but now you will. My children are 9th graders, and they are conscious of the fact that they're the only grade in high school that couldn't get vaccinated. But now you're going to have every high school is going to be vaccinated, which is going to change the game, I think, for that type of thing. Yeah, I will write that. Great. Other suggestions before around any one of these recommendations reinforced from 2021? I don't want to belabor it, but I just also know that sometimes it takes folks a minute to remind themselves what's on here when we switch gears. And I want to make sure I capture people's thoughts. Okay, and remember, I will send out that note, and I will entertain any other comments that people just think of tonight or over the next couple of days. And I appreciate everyone has been mindful of my deadlines too, so that I can work on this when I can find the time, which isn't an easy thing right now for me either. So thank you for all being thoughtful and sending me your comments in a timely fashion. Okay. And I also want to be able to turn this again, get it out to you before we finalize. So I'd like to incorporate the next round of comments and get it out to you for a final read before we finalize it. And remember, it has to go to Leslie. So that she can do her comments as well. Okay. And Leslie, I know it's for the school board, but I want to be respectful that you have to, you do your response as well. Okay. So the next, thank you very much. You're welcome. So the next section is recommendations reinforced from past BAC reports. And so this one, we continue to recommend as much transparency as possible in the budgeting process, right? We have large, difficult issues to tackle. And so this is something we took a step forward this year, but we're encouraging additional and continued transparency. Take a step up from here. And I know this is one Leslie and I've talked to a lot. You can't give all the details of the budget before it's there because it gets heavily debated until the last minute. So this is more around the big themes, and I want to make sure that I capture it that way. It's more about, we're going to have some big things to debate and make sure those things are out there for debating. For a long enough period of time that people really feel like they can weigh in on them. We also want to encourage the use of and building of partnerships in the community. So this is something that has come up in several past BAC reports. In this case, I reinforced it in terms of the revenue side of the equation. So I think there's lots of ways we can think about it, or cost reduction. So to really think about it in the context of what we're struggling with right now, which is a balanced budget. So that's the way I captured it, although I welcome any input here. And then the last one I put in, this has been a theme actually in the last couple of BAC reports, which is really asking the board to think about what it really wants from the BAC. I do feel like we tend to do a lot of sort of self-work in the fall. We do a lot of scrambling. And then I think we don't have quite as much time with the board as I think our position seems to suggest that we do. And I tried to be even more thorough in our comments this year to make sure that our thoughts were coming through. And I so appreciate this committee and how fast you all worked and how committed everyone was to getting comments in so we could get our collective thoughts in front of the board quickly and in a timely fashion. But I feel like we still sort of occupy a strange spot. And so I put these comments back in and to encourage the board to continue to think about, really how to best use this committee so that it does continue to attract a strong group of citizens, so that the group continues to feel relevant. And I think that that's an important part of attracting a strong group of folks to the group. So I welcome thoughts around what I chose there in terms of highlighting what you all sent to me, what I saw in past reports, and how I chose to highlight those comments. Feeling okay about the themes I chose, the way I...
Melanie, I especially like your theme of determining how to use BAC such that it's relevant. And I would even invite you to think about using an example from this past budget cycle that Josh brought up earlier in the meeting, meaning that survey for potential attendance in the coming year. I think BAC gets sort of a short end of the stick in that it is a budget committee. So, getting interest for people to serve on something that has to get sort of in the weeds of how APS operates is difficult. So I like that you've brought this to the top.
Okay, thank you. And then on the survey, how would you frame that?
I don't know. I liked how Josh framed it. He said something in the very beginning about how, if you think your work is at all relevant, that's an idea that came out of this committee when we sent, our proposal to the school board this past spring. So I just use it as an example of it was something it was an idea that came from this committee. Please forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but I do like the way Josh framed it earlier.
And I think he's raising his hand. Josh, is that you raising your hand? It is. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so one thing I would say is that you would like to be a resource to the school board, not just once a year, but throughout the year as budgetary questions arise, because your expertise is through the year and shouldn't be driven by a 2-month process.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
And thank you, Deidre.
Bob?
I'd like to say, Melanie, I think you did a fine job with this report, and I like in particular that you've brought back some of the things that we've commented on before, because I think they do bear repeating, and repetition is sometimes the only way to make some things change. So I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, I read your report last year, gave input to it, and like some of the points that you brought out and we made, we crafted together, and so wanted to bring some of those back. So thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And I think the ones that are valuable, I think that is one of the things that we can do is we can reinforce some of the things that are we think are important that bear repeating. Okay. Thank you, Julie and Sal. Okay, great. Okay, let's move on then to the FY23 budget guidance. Here I also took some of your input and then added a little bit of my own in terms of, I think I don't know if you all saw, and actually, Catherine, I think you sent it to me, and I should have sent it to everyone. And Catherine, I encourage you to send it to everyone. We actually got a shout out, and there was an Arlington Now, a quick article by a former board chair, and she actually cited the BAC committee report and comments. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody saw us and cited us. And it was a good moment to see that others are watching. But one of the points she made is that we used to ask for balanced budgets. And I think that given the size of the gaps that we're looking at, that something around doing balanced budget scenarios may be valuable to bring back, because the size of the budgets we have are so overwhelming. I just don't know how you operate with budget deficits that look like that. And so I think we need to consider, as I think it was Abby Raphael considered, that this is something that used to be in the budget guidance, that there had to be a balanced budget scenario that we lost a few years ago from the budget guidance, that we should consider bringing back. Is even if there are multiple scenarios, or even if there are scenarios that have a balanced budget, and then there are options for additions or things that we think are critical on top of that. But I think not having a balanced budget scenario does create a lot of angst in terms of how could we possibly close the budget, rather than having the school think about the superintendent and leadership thinking about what does it mean to close the budget, and having scenarios around that. So that is one thing that I added in here after thinking about it and reading her commentary. I have the idea of shifting from short-term thinking to longer-term thinking in the budget guidance here. We also have, we put in the greater transparency leading up to the release of the budget theme in here. I did say push for equitable outcomes was welcome, including Reed Goldstein's project around alternative funding models, but did suggest that we should figure out how to do that within the constructs of the budget. I did continue to recommend that we consider delivering on tighter enrollment forecasts. I do think that the board did take a great step in the last budget meeting, but I do think we're being a little conservative still in terms of the feedback we're getting, that families who've left many families are not considering coming back. So while as I think, yes, Arlington continues to grow, I think we have to acknowledge that we have a number of families that are not coming back. And this year will tell us, right, if those families will have a lot more information after this year that we can use going forward. And then the last one was one that Juan had put in around having deadlines for virtual versus in-person learning, which this may become less important actually as that virtual option becomes less and less of a separate track. But if it does continue to be a separate track and it has a big budget impact, then making sure that there's some strict deadlines for better planning around it will be important. So that all depends on how important that virtual learning track is. For next door in Fairfax, they're making it very, very strict, and you have to actually have a medical reason to be in the virtual track. And we'll have to see, how Arlington considers that. But that may determine how important and what the budget impacts are of that. Okay, and I have 3 hands, so let me take the hands one at a time. So Chuck, you're first.
I think we should make note of the one-time funds that are not going to be present. The fact that $40 million needs to be replaced, and starts us off deeper in the hole is worth mentioning.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
That was all I had.
Okay, thank you. Next is Nellie.
I'm not quite sure whether this meets the threshold of making it into the end of year, but I think one thing to consider when we look at the students that won't be coming back is potentially the number of students. I guess this would only really affect kindergarteners who would have otherwise started this year and kind of will be starting next year. I'm not sure how that's dealt with from a staffing perspective, because I assume there's the possibility that one class might be slightly larger as it progresses through their years.
I think that was part of the reason that the superintendent wanted to stay more conservative on the enrollment forecast, so he had flexibility based on some of those uncertainties. And so I'm not sure that I would put it into the budget guidance, but I would say that is, I'm guessing, and Monique can speak to that, why the board did not take a larger reduction in the enrollment forecast, despite some of the feedback they got about the fact that many families were not coming back, to make sure that they had the flexibility given some of those uncertainties at those levels. So I would say great comment, but I'm not sure that I would put it in here in budget guidance unless you feel like you have a strong bit of guidance off of that.
No, I got it. Thank you for the perspective.
Okay. Michael, you're next.
Thank you. And I'll just echo what everybody else said. I think you did a great job putting this together, Melanie. So don't be hesitant about all the good work that you did putting this together, and for everyone whose thoughts that are captured here. I don't want to get too repetitive, so tell me if this is not quite the route we want to take, but I feel like for this section, we need to kind of drive home some of the other points you made earlier. I think I'm back to the very beginning. We were talking about reports of the activities of the year, and you mentioned how successful the cross-committee meeting was, and that there's a one line suggesting that we should do that again at the end and the beginning of the year. And I feel like that just kind of drive that home, as well as the the role of BAC that we want to kind of have moving forward. I think we need to have some sort of language in this guidance for next year's budget, in case this is the only section the board or whoever takes from this whole document, saying we would love to have those cross-committee meetings, and we also would love to have some more excuse me, one-on-one time with the board as much as possible, to kind of sit down and give our thoughts as much as possible in the budget process as early on as possible. I see in your notes at the last few pages you talk about having to give the report alongside all the other committees, and really kind of wanted more central time, suggesting maybe in this section that we have some time where it's really just focused on our committee's recommendations with the board. I don't know if that's something that would fit in here or not. And again, I don't want to keep repeating ourselves in this thing, but I also think it's important to drive some of these points home really hard if we can.
Yeah, Michael, I might put those, I think they're great suggestions. I might put them in the conclusion, because I think the point of the budget guidance is more, what is the board going to tell the superintendent? So I don't think the board's going to tell the superintendent those things, but I do think that your point is a good one, which is in those things that we really want to reinforce, could I do a better job at putting some of those at the end to reinforce them? So I think that's great. I might just drop them down one more paragraph and put them at the end. But I think your point is a good one.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Excellent. Okay, and I have, oh no, that's your hand still up. So I'm gonna lower your hand for you because I figured out how to do that. I'm so excited. Okay. Oh no, actually, and when I lowered it, wait, you raised it again. So there we go. We're fighting with your hand. Okay, so we got it. It's down. Okay. So other thoughts. These are all great comments, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the support too that I captured people's input as well as I could. Since we're all signing off on this report, I do want to make sure, and I know we all have a number of opinions, a range of opinions across this committee, and like I said, I'll reach back out to the folks who couldn't make it tonight, because I know we have other opinions, even from the folks who are not present, and make sure that they feel comfortable, because their names will be on this too. But do I have any other comments? We have a few more minutes, and I won't keep you here any longer than we need to. And I know Eric will even talk policy for a couple minutes if we have a couple more minutes. But one last call to see if there are any other comments on the report, and if not, I will let Eric give a quick summary of what's happening on the policy front. Okay. Well, you guys are efficient. Thank you for reading this and for your great input. And I will put that last call out for any other comments by Saturday. And if not, I will incorporate and send out for one more review before we finalize. But thank you all very, very much. Okay, Eric, I know I put you on the spot there, but you did send me a note earlier, so I thought you would be ready to just give a quick set of headlines. And I agree, by the way, on the ones that are really early, probably to defer them, even over the summer or early fall. But I'll take your lead in terms of where you think we should lean in as a group.
Yeah, okay. Just to kind of spend a couple of minutes on policies. Obviously, at any point of the year, there's always policies being reviewed. They're capturing input, they're being reviewed, they're being presented to the board and reviewed by the board. The schedule changes, and in fact, they just reset the schedule a little bit in the last week or so. They moved a few things out further in the year, which is no surprise. That's pretty typical. For what's coming up, really, there's really only a handful of policies here that are open for input right now. There are 3 that are draft policy revisions that are going to be presented to the board in May. There's still opportunity to provide feedback on them. They're really not ones that are relevant for this committee. There's one about, for example, support resources extended time, which deals with after school activities. selection of textbooks and other instructional materials, which is obviously very appropriate for some committees, probably less so for ours, because there's really nothing in there related to that's related to the budget or expenditures. So there's only a handful there coming up for May. There's a few more policies scheduled for review, a couple more in June and July. And again, right now, the window's open to provide input into the drafting of those, or to review the drafting and provide input to those drafts. But again, they're not really that relevant to BAC. There's one on counseling crisis management, and there's one on physical interventions for students in crisis. So obviously it's very important, but not necessarily for the BAC as a whole to comment on. If individuals want to, I would encourage you to. There is one policy that will open up in June for input. Again, the review of it won't be until early in the fall. But it's one we may want to come and just talk about for a few minutes, or at least send out the information, and that's related to our telecommunications facilities on school property. So there is some wording in there around fees and revenue, and so it might be something that we want to take a look at in our June session, in our June meeting, and then in August. There is one we'll probably want to look at in advance of the October review, which is related to external funding and commercial activities. Obviously, that's again going to be something we want to look at from a revenue perspective. And then over the summer, there is a couple others that won't be reviewed until later in the fall. But again, looking 6 months ahead, there's an opportunity to review the current policy and provide input into the process before it gets started. We can start looking at it. They're related to our financial management policies around construction and site acquisition and capital improvements. It's probably worth taking a look at. I think at this point in time, we may not want to provide commentary, well, in the summer, but as until we see how things are going to play out for the fiscal year. But we certainly probably will want to take a look at that in the fall. So that's just kind of a heads up on what's out there right now. Not a lot here short term, but I think as we get into the summer and start looking at the fall, there'll be some things we want to look at.
It's great. Thank you, Eric, for keeping an eye on those for us. And I would encourage anyone who would like to comment on any of the policies individually, even if we aren't doing a collective memo, to go and do so. And if you aren't exactly sure how to do it, Eric can definitely point you in the right direction, since he's been following that process. Especially, for example, the one coming up that you mentioned about students in crisis, that is certainly a hot topic, and there may be others on the committee who have some personal interest in that one, and others that may be on the list. Thank you, Eric. Okay. With that, do we have any additional business? Any questions, suggestions? Chuck, anything else on your mind?
No, I think we've got everything captured.
Okay, excellent. Leslie or Monique, anything else on your mind?
Not from me.
I'm good, gang.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you all, everyone, for another great meeting. Thank you all for leaning in here as we prepare our year-end report. And we did successfully complete the budget. So thank you all again for everyone's work on that. And we will have a budget to work with for next year. And it was no small feat this year. So thank you all very, very much. And looking forward to preparing for our last meeting in June coming up.
Thanks, Melanie.
Okay, meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
night.
Okay, good night.
Everyone.
Night.
Night.
Good night.